Everyone is feeling something right now in offices, on laptops, in meetings, behind the screens. There is a quiet exhaustion, a disconnection, a heaviness that people don't fully understand, so they don't talk about it. They just call it a stress. But what if it's not just a stress? There are people listening to this right now who woke up this morning already tired, not physically, but in a way that feels like something inside them didn't rest. They check their phone before even checking in with themselves. Messages, they check their messages, so deadlines, expectations already waiting. And before the day even began, they were already behind. And maybe no one around them knows this because from the outside they look like they are managing, they're replying, they're attending meetings, they're delivering. But inside there is a quiet question: how long can I keep doing this? Hello, and welcome back to From the Therapy Room, Psychology of Mind and Body. I'm glad you're here. You're welcome to follow this space and stay connected. I'm Jyoti, your host. I'm a clinical counseling psychotherapist. This is a space where we gently explore the inner landscape of human mind, where psychology meets lived experiences, and where the stories we carry inside finally find language. In this podcast, we explore the psychology behind everyday emotional experiences, the things we often struggle to understand within ourselves, but feel very deeply in our day to day life. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep does not touch, a kind of heaviness that no weekend can dissolve. And somewhere between, I just need a break and I don't feel like myself anymore. There's a line, a very quiet line. Today we are sitting with that line, not to label it too quickly, not to fix it too fast, but to understand what is really happening within us when work, stress slowly becomes something deeper, heavier, and more existential. We are living in a culture that rewards functioning over feeling. You can be exhausted and still be praised. You can be emotionally numb and still be promoted. You can be deeply disconnected and still be seen as doing well. And this is where the confusion begins because burnout and depression don't arrive dramatically. They sleep in quietly, disguised as just a phase, just workload, just a stress. But the psyche always knows when something deeper is happening. There is also a very specific kind of loneliness in corporate life. You can be surrounded by people all day and still feel like no one knows you. Conversations stay functional. How is the project? Did you send that email? Or let's circle back. But no one asked, how are you underneath all of this? And over time, you also stop asking yourself because there is simply isn't space. There is something almost invisible happening in workplaces right now, a silent agreement. Everyone is struggling, but no one is really talking about it. Not because people don't want to, but because they don't quite have the words. They just know something feels off. So what happened instead? People say things like just tired, bit stressed, or need a break. But those words don't fully capture the experience. And when language is limited, awareness becomes limited. And when awareness is limited, helps feel out of reach. So people continue in the same mode kind of thing. not because they are okay, but because they don't know how to name what is happening. And then there is a strange comfort in all this collective silence, because if no one is naming it, then maybe it's normal. But normal does not always means healthy. A very specific moment in the morning when you wake up and before your feet touch the ground, there is a slight pause, a heaviness, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a subtle feeling of, I have to do this again. And it's so normalized that most people don't even question it anymore. They just get up and continue. And burnout is often spoken about exhaustion, but psychologically it is more specific. Burnout is what happens when effort and meaning lose their connection. You are still showing up, but something inside has stopped arriving. In workplace terms, burnout often looks like emotional exhaustion, cynicism toward work, or reduced sense of efficacy. But beneath that, there is often chronic over responsibility, a learned pattern of self worth tied to productivity, and an inability to step out of doing more. Burnout is not just too much work, it is too much of yourself being given away without replenishment. There's a particular kind of suffering that hides behind functioning. You're not breaking down, you're showing up, you're delivering, you're responding, you're keeping everything afloat. And that's exactly why no one notices. Because the world doesn't respond to how you feel, it responds to how you perform. So, as long as you're functioning, your pain remains invisible, even to yourself sometimes. Burnout is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like opening your laptop and just staring, reading the same mail 3 times and not processing it, or feeling irritated but not knowing why. And sometimes it shows up in the body, tightness in the chest before meetings, a constant background anxiety, the Sunday evening heaviness that starts creeping in. And the strange part is you keep doing, you keep going, because somewhere you have learned stopping is not an option. And at some point, life starts to feel like a sequence of tasks. Wake up, check your phone, work, respond, finish, repeat. And somewhere in that loop, you realize you're not really choosing your day anymore. You're just moving through it, almost like your body is present, but you're slightly absent. And let's talk about depression. Depression is different. It's not only about the work, it's about the loss of vitality in being itself. From a humanistic lens, depression often reflects a disconnection from the authentic self. You are not just tired of work, you're tired of existing in a way that doesn't feel like you. From the inside, depression can feel like emptiness instead of exhaustion, meaninglessness instead of overload, and withdrawal instead of irritation. Carl Rogers would say this is what happens when there is a deep gap between who you are and who you have learned to be. Depression doesn't always say, I'm sad. Sometimes it says, what's the point? Or even if I do this, what changes? Or why does everything feel flat? It's like life loses its texture. Things that once felt meaningful now feel like tasks. Even moments of rest don't feel like rest. And there's often guilt because from the outside life may look fine, which creates an even deeper isolation. If everything is okay, why do I feel like this? There's a difference between rest and numbing. Rest restore you, numbing just distract you from feeling how tired you are. Scrolling for hours, watching something endlessly, staying busy even in your downtime. It can look like relaxation, but internally, nothing is really settling. And that's often where confusion deepens. There is often a split that develops. The outer self, which is competent, functional, and reliable, and the inner self, which is tired, disconnected, and questioning. And the longer this gap continues, the more exhausting is becoming to hold both. Because one is being lived and the other is being suppressed. Now let's go a little more deeper. Because neither burnout nor depression is just about the present, they carry history somehow. Burnout often has unconscious roots in the need to prove oneself and fear of not being enough and early conditioning around achievement and approval. So you're not just working, you are reenacting something, trying to finally receive validation, safety, and worth. Depression, on the other hand, can be what happens when the psyche says, I cannot keep performing this version of you anymore. It is a collapse, but sometimes also a protest, a refusal, not conscious but deeply intelligent. Sometimes burnout is not about the job at all, it's about an old story. The child who learned, I'm valued only when I'm performed, or I'm safe when I meet expectations, or I'm loved when I don't disappoint. That child grows into an adult who cannot rest because rest feels like losing worth, risking rejection, becoming invisible. So even exhaustion becomes something to push through, not because they want to, but because something deeper feels at stake. For many people, work is not just what they do, it's who they are. Their sense of worth, their identity, their place in the world is deeply tied to being competent, protective, and needed. So when burnout begins, it's not just energy that is threatened, it's identity. And that creates a deeper fear. If I slow down, who am I without this? So instead of stepping back, people hold on tighter, even when it's hurting them. From a Jungian lens, if we see, both burnout and depression are not just problems. They are messages from the psyche. Burnout can be seen as the ego over identifying with the role and living too far from the inner self. And from this perspective, depression can be seen as a call to descend inward and an encounter with the shadow and a necessary slowing down of life that has lost alignment. Jung believed that symptoms are not interruptions, they are invitations. So instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? We might ask, what part of me is asking to be heard through this? What if burnout is not just depletion, but a life that has become too narrow? And what if depression is not just darkness, but a descent into parts of you that were never allowed to exist. The part that doesn't want to hustle, or the part that questions everything, and the part that wants a different kind of life. You might say what you resist in yourself eventually appears as suffering. You're not lazy, you're depleted. You're not unmotivated, you're disconnected. And you're not weak, you have been strong for too long. There is also a quite kind of grief here, not for something big and obvious, but for small daily losses. The loss of enthusiasm, the loss of presence, the loss of lightness, and the loss of connection. It's a grief that doesn't get acknowledged because nothing major has happened, and yet something meaningful is slowly slipping away. This is where people mostly get lost if we talk about why we confuse about burnout and depression. Because on the surface, they kind of overlap. Both can look like fatigue, disengagement, and lack of motivation. But here is the subtle difference: burnout is often situational, mostly tied to work, and depression is often pervasive, touching all areas of life. Fusion happens because we normalize burnout, we think it's a part of success, and we minimize depression because we call it just stress. And we are disconnected from inner signals. We notice performance changes, shifts. So we keep pushing until the body or psyche forces us to stop. Also, there is something comfortable here if we acknowledge that there is more than burnout, then something must change. Not just overload, but identity, choices, and possibly even direction. And that's not easy. So sometimes it feels safer to say, I'm just tired, instead of asking, am I living in a way that is slowly disconnecting me from myself? There is also a slight comparison constantly running in the background. You look around and think, everyone else seems to be managing. They're working just as much, maybe more. Or so why I'm feeling like this? And instead of becoming curious, you become self critical, which pushes you even further away from understanding what you're experiencing. And it it really happens dramatically. It's not one big breakdown, it's a moment, small but undeniable. Maybe you're sitting in a meeting and suddenly you realize, I don't care. Not out of laziness. Thing you has gone quiet. Or you open your laptop and instead of starting work, you just sit there staring, not because you don't know what to do, but because you don't have the energy to be the person who does it. Or maybe you come home after a long day and instead of feeling relieved, you feel nothing. And that's when the question began, what is happening to me? For many people, it didn't start like this. There was interest, I mean, curiosity, even passion. But over time, that passion expectation, and expectations became pressure, and pressure slowly drained the joy out of what once felt meaningful. But the thing is here that how to identify, or what are the signs that you might be crossing the line, because sometimes the earliest sign is not sadness, it's kind of irritability. Small things start to feel overwhelming, emails feel intrusive, conversations feel draining, and requests feel like pressure. And you might think, why I'm reacting like this? But all of the moment, it's accumulated depletion. Before the mind understands, the body already knows. It shows up as heaviness in the morning, a subtle resistance before logging in, and a sign you didn't notice you were holding. The body doesn't speak in words, it speaks in sensations, and often we override those signals until they become, too loud to ignore. Pay attention to this subtle shift. Earlier, you were tired after work, now you feel tired before it even begins. Earlier, rest helped, and now rest feels like avoidance. Earlier, you had moments of relief, now, even relief feels temporary or absent. And this is not something to panic about, but it is something to listen to. Instead of rigid labels, try noticing patterns. Out when you feel better when away from work, you still find moment of joy outside work. Your exhaustion feels tired of specific demands, and you may be moving toward depression when rest doesn't restore you. Things you once enjoyed feel flat, and there is a quiet sense of hopelessness. You feel kind of disconnected even from yourself. And the most important sign, when functioning continues but aliveness disappears. Is coming into my mind that why we don't stop even when we know. So even when people sense something is wrong, they don't stop, not because they don't care about themselves, but because stopping feels complicated. Stopping me might means facing uncomfortable truth or disappointing others or losing stability or questioning life choices. So instead, they negotiate, like just one more week or after this deadline or once things settle. But things rarely settle because the pattern is not outside, it's inside. If you sit very honestly with it, slowing down is not just uncomfortable, it is frightening. Because in that silence, questions begin to surface. Is this what I really want? Or am I fulfilled? Or how long have I been ignoring this? So, staying busy becomes a way to avoid meeting those questions. And there's a sentence many people live by: one thing settle, I'll take care of myself. But if you look closely, things rarely settle. There's always another deadline, there's always another expectation, there's always another demand. So self care keeps getting postponed into a future that never quite arrives. Time when work ended. It's all about the workplace reality and why does this matter? And there was a time when work ended. Now it lingers in notifications, in emails, in that subtle urge to just check once. And slowly, your mind never fully leaves work, even when your body does. And without that psychological boundary, recovery becomes incomplete. The people who struggle the most with burnout are often the ones who look the strongest because they are responsible, reliable, high functioning. They don't easily fall apart. They adapt, they push, they override. But that strength has a shadow. They don't ask for help early, they normalize overload. They tell themselves, I can handle this until one day, they can't. And even then, they try a little longer. Workplace often reward the very pattern that lead to burnout: overcommitment, emotional suppression, and constant availability. And many people in burnout are seen as dedicated, high performers, and reliable, which makes it harder to stop because stopping feels like failure, loss of identity, and letting people down. So the system and the psyche both keep the cycle going. Many workplaces are not designed for human nervous system, they are designed for output, which means speed is value over depth. is valued over boundaries, and consistency is valued over emotional reality. So, when someone begins to struggle, they often don't feel supported. They feel like they are falling behind, and instead of slowing down, they push harder, which deepens the cycle. At some point, you stop checking it with yourself, not intentionally, but gradually. You stop asking, what do I need? How am I feeling? And life becomes more about responding than relating to your own experiences. If you can, don't answer immediately. Just notice what happens into your body as you hear these questions. Because sometimes the body answers before the mind does. Instead of rushing to diagnose, sit with yourself just for a moment and ask yourself, if I remove work from the picture, how do I feel about my life? Am I tired, or have I lost connection with what makes me feel alive? And maybe even more importantly, where in my life am I overfunctioning and underfeeling? About something which is really required here, which is from awareness to gentle responsibility kind of thing. Because awareness is not about labeling yourself, it's about honesty. A quiet internal acknowledgement that something needs attention, not fixing, not rushing, not judging, just noticing. Because the moment you can name your experience, you're no longer completely lost in it. That place, even if small shifts become possible. There is certain courage in simply noticing, not fixing, not solving, not changing everything immediately, just pausing long enough to say, this is where I am. And that is often the first real step toward change. There are people who reach a point where they say, I don't recognize myself anymore. And that moment, as painful as it is also a doorway. Because recognition begins there, not of who you were supposed to be, but of who you have been trying to hold together for too long. There is nothing weak about reaching a point where something inside you says, this is too much, or this is not me anymore. That voice is not the problem, it's the beginning of honesty. Burnout and depression are not just conditions to fix, they are. And sometimes they are the psyche's way of guiding you back to yourself. Maybe the reason this feels so personal is because it is. This is not about burnout. This is not about depression. And before we end, I don't want to give you more information. I want to offer you a moment. Just a small pause with yourself if you can. Just gently bring your attention inward. No need to change anything. Just notice. Simply notice. What is the quality of your energy right now? Not what you should feel, not what you want to feel, but what is there? Is there heaviness? Is there restlessness? Is there numbness? Or is there a quiet exhaustion? Or maybe something softer that you haven't named in a while. And just for this moment, see if you can be with it without trying to fix it, without rushing away from it. Because often the healing doesn't begin when we push harder, it begins when we finally stop long enough to notice. This is about human being trying to live in a way that the world rewards, but the soul quietly resists. And if something inside you resonated today, Don't ignore that resonance. It's not weakness, it's awareness beginning. You don't have to figure everything out today, but you do deserve to feel what your life is doing to you. Thank you for spending this time with me today. This has been from the therapy room, Psychology of Mind and Body. If this resonated with you, you can share what you felt or noticed. I would love to hear your reflection. And if you would like to know something more, please mention it in the comment. I would love to hear that too. And if you find these conversations meaningful, please follow or subscribe this podcast. Feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it. So these spaces of reflection can continue to be a part of your journey. Until next time, take care of your mind, your body, and the quiet spaces within you. See you next time. I'll be sitting just beside you. Take care.